You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Hello, you gorgeous lot. How are you doing? How's your week been? Fun? Anyone been out investigating? Discovering stuff? Speaking to spirits? Tell me all about it in the chat room. Don't leave me hanging. Don't leave me alone. Penny no mates. Well, what have we got for you tonight? Well, tonight we're actually going to be heading up north to Scotland. And we're going to be talking about a place that I will admit I hadn't actually heard of until our illustrious leader of Parasearch, one Kerry Greenaway, asked me to do a show on it. Hi, Kaz. Hi, Alan. Yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me now because Alan's just put silence. I love it. I'm presuming he's being sarcastic because, well, it's working at my end, so hopefully you can all hear me. Perhaps somebody could put in the chat room that you can actually hear me. That would be useful to know, considering the problems we've had with Spreaker and everything for the last couple of weeks. But yeah, so Boleskine House up in Scotland. Yeah, so Kerry asked me to do a show on it, and I sort of thought, what do I do? And then when I started looking into it, there's an awful lot for us to talk through. And she suggested, oh good, you can hear me, thank you, cool, everyone can hear me, I'm happy now. Anyway, she suggested I contacted one Ashley Mortimer to talk to him. Now, you'll discover whilst we're doing the interview that Ashley and I discovered we did actually have quite a lot in common. Not that I am also a director of pagan studies, but to do with our music connection, and there is a very strong music connection to Boleskine House, which you'll find out about. And I'm not going to tell you what that is just yet. You may already know, but anyway. So who was listening to Sean's show just before mine with Gary from EAPI on it? Yeah, I do actually listen to other shows, you know. I do. Can't always listen to all of Sean's because I have to click off his to get mine ready, but, you know, I do spread the love a little bit. I'll listen to my fellow presenters. Anyway, so before I forget and before I start playing out the interview, YouTube. Has everyone subscribed to our new YouTube channel? I'm watching the numbers, you know. I'm Big Brothers are watching you. Go and subscribe to it. You get all our shows on there, and there's extra content going to be on there as well, and it doesn't hurt. You just click the subscribe button. And our competition. Well, the competition's been extended a few days, and that's to go to the chocolate factory with our very own Willy Wonka, also known as Kaz Rooney. But unfortunately, there's no chocolate at the chocolate factory, so if you want chocolate, take your own. But if you still want a chance to enter that competition, I do listen to other shows, Kaz, yes. Go and like it on the Parasearch pages, have a comment, and I believe the draw's going to be now on Friday, and perhaps Kerry can put in the chat room, confirm that to me, that the draw now for the chocolate factory is actually going to take place get my words out in a minute, take place this Friday. Well, I don't really think I've got anything else to tell you, really. So Kaz is bringing chocolate cake. Oh gosh, I wish I was coming then. Oh well, sorry. But yes, go and enter the competition. Go and like our YouTube page and go and listen to all our other shows that we've done. They're bloody good if I say so myself. Now, before I start playing the interview that I did with Mr. Mortimer earlier this week for you, there is a bit of a warning because one of the people we're going to be talking about is Aleister Crowley. Now, anyone who knows anything about Aleister Crowley will know that there's certain things that he was quite into. So, don't be offended when the talk will go, well, let's say perverted. Not quite perverted, but it did start freewheeling a little bit. But anyway, let's play it and see what you think. Okay, so on tonight's Haunted Histories, we're going a sort of a bit off-piste, I suppose, in a way for me, because I'm not doing the pure history bit and the pure paranormal bit. But I'm really excited because I'm actually getting to speak to someone who is the director of the Centre of Pagan Studies, Mr. Ashley Mortimer.
Hello.
Hi, Ashley, how are you?
Hello, pretty good, thank you very much.
Good. Now, saying you're the director of the Centre of Pagan Studies, what does that mean?
Well, the Centre for Pagan Studies was a small organisation started in Sussex in the 1990s, and it was set up to give public talks and lectures on occult subjects with accuracy and honesty. Okay. That was the sort of stick of the Centre for Pagan Studies, and so it was run by a friend of mine who's now passed away, who was also in the music industry, an ex-drummer, session musician named John Bellum Payne. And John was the centre was patronised by Doreen Valiente, the mother of modern witchcraft, who took a shine to John. He became her last high priest, and she left her magical collection to him when she died in '99. So John gave the entire collection into trust, and I was one of the trustees that founded the organisation.
So what do you do with the stuff that Doreen Valiente sort of donated? Right. Is it a museum? Is it?
We've done a lot of exhibitions. We did a very big exhibition that ran for a year at the Royal Pavilion Museums in Brighton last year, and caused a nice stir there because it was an exhibition of magic, witchcraft, and mysteries. And we used Doreen's collection of occult books and her objects and artifacts, which were also given to her by her high priest Gerald Gardner, the founder of modern day Wicca. Yep. And we used those to tell the story of how paganism starts with its early roots in mankind's early religious history, and leads right the way through into the 20th century to people like Gardner, Aleister Crowley, and co, who have influenced the modern-day pagan and occult movement.
Okay. So are there any exhibits coming up soon? Any in the
At this moment, no.
No?
No, we're in talks at the moment, but I'm always out and about giving talks at different conferences, especially pagan conferences, where I do a mini exhibition and I do a talk about the subject.
Yeah. So what do you think of the Witchcraft Museum down in Cornwall?
Well, the Witchcraft Museum in Cornwall was founded by a guy called Cecil Williamson, who was Gerald Gardner's partner, and they founded a museum together and subsequently fell out with each other. So Williamson took all of his stuff, and so Gardner claimed some of his, and they both sort of argued with each other via letters for several years, and Gardner set up in the Isle of Man, or continued in the Isle of Man, and Williamson went down and founded Boscastle. So there are quite close links, yes.
Yeah, definitely. I must admit, it's a bit further back than the Wicca side of things, but living in Essex, I'm not a million miles away from where the infamous Matthew Hopkins left.
Oh yes, Manningtree.
Yes, and around that part of the world. So there's quite a strong sort of history of persecution and everything. There
is. I mean, the essence of Gerald Gardner is that, and Wicca, is that Gerald claimed that there was a surviving tradition that was traceable back through the centuries, back to the days of the witch trials and the witch hangings that took place, founded on the works of a lecturer named Margaret Murray, who's later and subsequently been somewhat rubbished by her peers for her conclusions that she drew. But the big argument rages, did Gardner make it up and invent Wicca, or did he draw upon existing sources and make use of them to supply his credentials for a craft that he joined that did have some hereditary history? And no one's really solved that riddle yet. But there's no question that Gardner was heavily influenced by Victorian occultism and organisations like the Golden Dawn, and particularly Aleister Crowley.
Okay. Which leads us on quite neatly, thank you for that segue there, to...
You're welcome.
Anyone would think we'd planned this.
Anyone would think we planned it, yeah.
Leads us on to Boleskine House. Now, Boleskine House is up in Scotland, to anyone who doesn't know. It's about 21 miles south of Inverness. And there's another sort of kind of, I suppose you could call it, paranormal supernatural link to Boleskine, to do with a rather large lake, which I'm going to mention in a second. I'm not going to drop that one just yet for anyone who doesn't know that story, so you can bear with me for that one. But it was built in the 1760s by one Colonel Fraser, as I think it was like a single-story hunting lodge. He built it originally, and it was occupied by various different families until in 1899 the infamous, one of the worst men in Britain, as he was coined, and all that kind of thing, one Aleister Crowley moved in, or bought it,
right,
and moved in 1899. Now, supposedly, one of the reasons he chose it, and with your knowledge of the pagan side and occult, and the fact that you are I can't even get my words out now, an initiate. That's actually quite hard to say. An initiate. He chose it because it was secluded, supposedly. You might be able to correct me if I'm wrong here, Ashley.
No, I'm waiting for you to say something wrong so I can correct you, but you're absolutely correct.
Oh, I like it when I'm right. It was secluded. It had a door to the north, which apparently was incredibly important. And it had he actually then built onto it a terrace with fine river sand to capture spirit footprints.
That's right.
Now, why were all these things important?
Right. So the background is that Crowley became a member of the Golden Dawn.
Yes.
And the founder of the Golden Dawn, a bloke called Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, translated a lot of medieval books, and he translated a number of them, the Lesser and Greater Key of the Solomon and various other things. And one of the books that took Crowley's interest was a book entitled The Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. I think it's originally written in about 1450 something, 1456, and Mathers translated it. Mathers had moved to Paris. And the essence of the book is that if one can summon, through the rituals described in the book, one's holy guardian angel, the guardian angel will then explain to the summoner how to summon various realms of malevolent demons, which will then do its bidding. Right. So Crowley wanted to work this magic, so he was following the directions in the Mathers translation of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. Crowley needed these various bits to construct these rituals, which were said to take 6 months, and he needed things like the terrace of sand, and he needed the lodge at the end of it, and he needed the various things, which Boleskine fulfilled. He'd been up in the Lake District looking for a suitable place, and then he found Boleskine House, or came across it, and being of means at the time, he bought it with the intention of working this magic, right, which does get interrupted, and Crowley goes off to rescue Mathers from the terrors of the political arguments going on in the Golden Dawn, and there's all sorts of stories about that. But essentially, Crowley wanted to use Boleskine House as a place to conduct this long series of rituals that are supposed to involve the summoning of the Holy Guardian Angel.
Right.
Crowley did it backwards, and he summoned the demons first. And they wreaked havoc through Boleskine, according to Crowley, and you've got some, we can tell you some stories about the things that happened there. Do you want to do that now? Do you want to talk about
we'll do that in a second. But one of the things that I read was that when he found the property, it wasn't just that all the pieces fitted together for him, but he believed it to be the focal point of a mystical energy, whether there's ley lines or whatever the sort of belief was. Now, when you look at the history of the place, and I'm not going to talk about things that happened post Crowley yet, because they're quite they're quite indicative of there was something not too pleasant residing there. But long before Crowley moved in, sort of 800 years beforehand, there is talk in the parish that there was a kirk, which is basically the Scottish word of a church, that was torched, was burnt down with all the residents,
Congregation.
Thank you, congregation. Yeah, all of them inside, and it was razed to the ground, and they all died, and that's one of the sort of the stories that has gone through the generations of being on the site of Boleskine House. But one of the other things as well that I mentioned, the Colonel Fraser, who built the property, he was actually related, sort of, to the 11th Lord Lovat, one Simon Fraser. Now, Simon Fraser was executed. He was beheaded because of the Jacobite revolution, where they were trying to get a different king on the throne and all those wonderful things. But what was quite interesting is that you say he was beheaded, but apparently when Lord Lovat was about to be beheaded in London, at the Tower of London, the scaffolding that he was on collapsed, and it actually crushed quite a few people who were waiting to see have his head lopped off. And apparently he actually had his head taken off while he was laughing hysterically at the fact this seriously, I found it in more than one place, whilst the scaffolding collapsed. And it is meant to be, and if someone can tell me otherwise, I'd love to hear it, it's meant to be where the term laughing your head off came from.
I think I've heard that. I didn't know it was related particularly to that story, and I didn't know until you said it that there was a connection to Boleskine House.
But the connection is that Lord Lovat is meant to be seen haunting Boleskine House. And a lot of people say, well, hang on, he didn't die there. Why would he haunt there? Well, the belief is that he's so irritated at this descendant, Colonel Fraser, who built it in the grounds to annoy him, to deliberately annoy him, that's why he haunts it.
That sounds potentially plausible.
It does,
I don't
doesn't
think
it?
there's any record. There's no record of Crowley being aware of that. He doesn't record that in his extensive diaries. I think Crowley chose Boleskine for the practical reasons of the ritual, and I don't know whether he was ever aware of that level of the history of it. The other thing that Boleskine provided for Crowley was he was able to indulge in the things he enjoyed, like mountain climbing. So there was some quite good rock escarpments.
Yes.
And there's some, and also he went salmon fishing on the lake. On the. Are you going to say the words yet, or?
Not yet. No,
Not
I'm
yet.
saving
Okay.
that one. I'm saving that one. Yeah.
Crowley
We're
rather
foreshadowing a bit what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes.
Crowley rather amusingly, in his diaries, records that it would be a dull year when somebody didn't drown in that lake.
Nice.
Nice, huh?
Yeah, what a lovely man. So you're saying there were some amusing stories about his conjuring of demons before his guardian angel.
I wouldn't call them amusing. I mean, there is amusing stories of Crowley's escapades at Boleskine. I think he fancied himself as he called himself the Laird of Boleskine. He fancied himself as a Scottish laird, and he started then inventing this history of Scottishness in his family. And there's a kind of amusing scene where he confronts Mathers at the head of the Golden Dawn at some point when the two of them fall out. Mathers himself had an invented Scottish heritage. And Crowley's biographer, John Simons, rather aptly puts it that the Laird of Boleskine confronted the Comte de Glenstray, and neither one of them had a drop of Scottish blood in them. But the amusing story, one of the amusing stories is Crowley's mountaineering exploits. There's a guy called Guilliamod who went on an expedition up Chogaree with Crowley, which ended in disaster. And Crowley invites him afterwards to come and stay at Boleskine. Mm-hmm. Now, Guillemard, I don't think he endeared himself to Crowley. Crowley says the man wrote a book about our expedition that was uninhibited with either factual accuracy or literary merit. And I think he wanted to take the rise out of him. So he had his gilly, or his henchman, come into the breakfast room when they were playing billiards and say, "My lord, a haggis has been seen upon the hills." Crowley and the others then rush to the gun cabinet, and Crowley leads them on this expedition to bag a haggis, which he's wound this guy up to tell him that the haggis is a very rare beast indeed. And he has the whole hunting party, up to their necks in the ornamental fish pond to shake off their scent so that the haggis can't detect their approach. And they creep very slowly up the hill through the wet grass. Crowley even says, I think, he makes some acid remark that by this time his own wonderful ability to play this joke was so great that he'd conjured up a kind of an excitement within himself. So they all crawl up to the top of the hill, and he has this very dramatic telling of how this man Gilead raises his gun and bags at 300 yards the local farmer's prize ram, which they then tell him is the haggis, and they go home and they have this huge party where they eat it. And to Crowley's delight, the guy is so chuffed with himself and so imbued with his own ego that he has the thing mounted on this huge plate with a big golden thing declaring that he is the successful hunter of the haggis. So there's the sort of escapade that Crowley got up to at Boleskine, and there's another much less salubrious story of Crowley if you want to hear that as well.
Well, I was going to say, most of us think of Crowley as being all sex and drugs.
Well, this one's got sex and drugs in it because
yeah,
Crowley
not
wrote...
so much the rock and roll. That was the next owner that we're going to talk about. But
there's definitely a case for saying that Crowley was the rock star of his age. That in many ways he did sort of lay the trail for excessive behaviour, which is what rock stars are apparently prone to. But not that you and I would know anything about that.
Pass.
Oh, there we are. That laugh belies something. But no, Crowley wrote to the not the temperance movement, the Temperance Society. He wrote to some Society for the Protection of Morals, complaining about how conspicuous prostitution was in the village of Foyers near to Boleskine. Mm-hmm. Of course, Foyers is not a very big village, and somehow he managed to convince them to send this chap up to spend a week up there investigating the conspicuousness of prostitution in the village. And they wrote to Crowley this lovely letter that sort of says, we're most bemused, Your Lordship, that we could find no evidence whatsoever of prostitution in the village. And Crowley sent them a postcard that simply said, "Conspicuous by its absence, you fools."
I quite like his sense of humour.
He was certainly humorous, but, and presumably good company, if you like traipsing through ornamental fish ponds chasing haggises. But everybody who got involved with Crowley, one way or another, seems to have suffered some kind of unpleasant fate, sometimes directly at the hands of Crowley.
Yeah, I mean, Hugh Gillies, I think, was Crowley's housekeeper, and he lost 2 children whilst he was his housekeeper. So, that's just the one that I can think of. That
the housekeeper vanished. This is within moving. I mean, Crowley moved into Boleskine, and within a few weeks of moving in, he was terrorising the locals with taking his dogs for walks on the local landscape and enjoying watching them hunting sheep. The coachman got the DTs. Crowley brought his clairvoyant friend up from London, and she went bonkers and disappeared back to London and was last seen. She changed her profession to prostitution. And there's stories of workmen trying to kill Crowley, and the local butcher who received a postcard from Crowley with the name of 2 demons on it, and who then cut off his own hand in an accident that morning in the butcher's shop. So there was. It looks like the new laird of Boleskine caused quite a stir in the locality, and there are many tales of that. But he never actually completed his Abramelin magic. What he did do, however, was, as I say, he did it the wrong way round, and rather than summon his holy guardian angel, he conjured up the 111 servitors of hell, the malevolent demons, instead. Now, Crowley's later story is that on a trip to Cairo in Egypt, he did successfully summon his holy guardian angel, who dictated to him a document called the Book of the Law, which became the central scripture of Crowley's religion, Thelema. Mm-hmm. So Crowley, in a strange sort of backwards way, the operation of Abramelin that took place at Boleskine didn't succeed, in that he didn't get his holy guardian angel, but eventually he did do. However, it's said that the 111 servitors of hell, and there are many of these malevolent demons, caused mayhem at Boleskine, and mayhem through the rest of Crowley's life.
Right. So, how did Crowley get into it in the first place?
Well,
do we know what his trigger was?
Possibly his family. He was brought up in a family that were staunch members of an organisation called the Plymouth Brethren, who were very, very strict Christians, very Puritan. And I think basically he rebelled. He went to Cambridge, and whether he discovered or whether he just, enjoyed indulging in such things, he lost his virginity at a young age, and he annoyed his family, and he basically did what most children do, particularly what most children who eventually become musicians do, and he just rebelled. You know, I mean, there's an old joke in the music industry: what's the difference between children and musicians? To which the answer is, well, children will eventually grow up.
That's about right.
Yeah. So I think Crowley's Rebellion. However, he was certainly gifted as a poet. He was very gifted as a mountaineer. He got further up peaks in the Himalayas. I think his expedition up what became K2 got further than anybody else did for 40 years after his death. So wow. He was quite good at it. And his interest in magic, and particularly sexual magic, was another of his gifts. He was definitely a talented magician. Whether one buys into all of the claims he made about the things he did, there's no doubt that the Book of the Law and some of Crowley's other works took the knowledge of the occult, and I mean things, the sort of things that the Golden Dawn were doing, took it all to a new level and laid an occult foundation for. I don't mean an organisation. I mean just sort of metaphorically a foundation for modern day occultism and other things to spring from it, such as the rise of modern paganism in the guise of Wicca and the like.
But a lot of people see Crowley as being a Satanist or a devil worshipper.
I think he would have found that enjoyable. I think he would have liked the notoriety that brought him. But I don't think Crowley ever saw himself as a pagan either, to be honest. He saw himself as a magician, and he saw himself as a Thelemite, I suppose, which is the name that people give to followers of Crowley's Thelemic religion. He assumed the higher grades in the Golden Dawn that nobody thought was possible for a human being to do so, and set himself up as what he described as the Logos of the Aeon. He saw himself as the herald of the new age of Pisces, which is still coming in. And the end of the age of Aquarius. Right. So he set himself up to be sort of this great thing, the great beast. And the Book of Revelation talks about things that Crowley revelled in. There are things about the whore of Babylon, and Crowley's sex magic was predicated on having a working partner, sexually and magically, who he described as the Scarlet Woman, or otherwise known as Babylon. Yeah. And again, there's some little bits and snippets that you were telling me before the show of parallels of these sort of things. So Crowley's the essence of Crowleyan magic is that the sexual act, especially when done in a manner that's reminiscent of the yogis, and the raising of Kundalini energy, is the mechanism by which most magic, and in fact you could argue that all religion is carried out. Raise energy, direct it, and put it to use. Result being contact with spirits or contact with deity. So Crowley used sex as a way of raising energy.
So, all right, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, if you pardon the pun. Was he genuinely into the whole magic side, do you think?
Absolutely, 100%.
Or was he using it partly as an excuse to get his rocks off and become notorious?
There's no doubt he enjoyed sex, and there's no doubt he was a pervert. In my opinion, he's perverted. He indulges and enjoys sexual encounters of the most bizarre kind with more or less anybody he can get his hands on. But in all of his diaries and all of his recorded history, it seems to me it becomes clear that his actual goal is the moving forward and development of magic, and then having received these supposedly dictated doctrines that are in the Book of the Law, to then push forward Thelema. So I don't think it's in any way arguable that Crowley was a fraud. No, I don't think there's any question that he genuinely believed in the magic that he worked. And it strikes me that an intelligent man like Crowley would have soon given up on it if he didn't believe he was having success in it. But sexual energy is known throughout the ancient world and the modern world as a powerful force and a powerful tool that can be harnessed in certain ways. So I'm thinking of tantric sex and tantric yoga and those sorts of areas. But Crowley just took it to a kind of Western extreme. Although Crowley spent a lot of time in China and in the Far East, and he was well schooled in yoga and those other sorts of disciplines. And so he knew about how to cross over Eastern esotericism with Western tradition. Right. And he kind of took liberties with everything in his life, including his sexual partners and the like, and the manner in which magic was raised. Right. He has some, And I think he also liked alliteration and pun, and I think as we demonstrated in those other things, he quite liked humour. There's an occasion where he suggested to somebody that that the most efficacious way of working magic would be the sacrifice of boy children, and he then said, "I do this myself over 200 times a year." Now I don't know whether you can get the pun or the joke there of what he's describing. Of how
probably more than 200.
Well, you think about it on every occasion, then under certain circumstances, when alone, then a gentleman may well effectively sacrifice male children, in modern terms, to the great god of Kleenex, probably.
Well, how do you know they were male children?
I think isn't that biological? Isn't that biological no, maybe it's not biological. Maybe it's just the fact that it's the issue of a man.
But no, I get what he was alluding to. Yes, that's why I'm trying not to cough while I'm laughing, trying to stay serious, slightly serious.
Gosh, I'm starting to play Crowley to you. You know, the devil's Crowley, the Crowley advocate. Yes, aren't I? Yeah. Well, I was going to say, if you want to cough and spit it out, that's up to you.
Behave, Mr. Mortimer. Behave. Oh dear,
I shan't.
This has just gone off on a really bad tangent. Anyway,
sorry.
So obviously there was an awful lot of a negative juju that Crowley had further imbibed Boleskine with the sort of opening of these, bringing in these demons without having his guardian angel. And I actually think it's quite arrogant to think you could control malevolent energies. Anyway.
Well, I mean, it's completely bonkers to follow the book of Abramelin and summon the demons before you've got the Holy Guardian. Well, technically you're not supposed to be able to, because it's the Holy Guardian Angel who tells you how to summon them and then control them. But yeah, I mean, this is mad, and these things wreaked havoc. And there's no doubt that he stirred something up in a spiritual and energetic spirit current in Boleskine that was that he never finished, because he rushed off to try to take over the Golden Dawn and caused all this other stuff, and he never actually got to finish the operation. And
when he came back to Boleskine, he realised that there was a lot of darkness there. There were shadows. There was there was dark rooms when it should have been bright sunshine, and all those kind of things. So
he did. He records in his diaries being pursued by the Abramelin demons throughout the rest of his life, and that's true. Yes. Yeah.
Well, he left there in 1913. Now, we're sort of fast-forwarding a bit through history, but in the sort of late 60s, it probably became, shall we say, trendy to be a bit alternative, to not be following the conventional path of beliefs, I suppose is one way of putting it. And one of the very well-known people who was actually a Crowleyite and a collector of Crowley and an enthusiast of Crowley was one Mr. James Page of Led Zeppelin.
Never heard of him.
No. I was going to say, if anyone is listening to this who doesn't know who Led Zeppelin is or Jimmy Page is, turn off now, because, Ashley and I were talking about these. When Zeppelin were around, there was three bands, really. You followed one of the three. It was probably either Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple. Would you agree there, Ashley?
Well, I liked all of them, but I think that's about true. If you were into music and into those influences, I mean, I grew up in the late 70s, so it was. I was hanging out at school with the cool sixth form kids who were mourning the breaking up of all three bands, really.
And then you had Thin Lizzy coming on about then, and AC/DC coming in around then, and it was an amazing time.
New wave of heavy metal that followed punk, yes.
Yeah,
indeed.
Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and all that. So it was an amazing. But anyway, those three bands, and probably even more so Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, you're either a Zeppelin or a Purpleite. You can't really be both.
That's about right, yeah.
Yeah, and I will admit I do like Led Zeppelin. I have got Led Zeppelin albums in my collection, but when it comes to knowing the music, I'm probably more of a Deep Purple girl than a Led Zeppelin girl.
I think I'm a Purple boy as well. And,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, especially the Ian Gillan. His voice still gives shivers up my spine. But anyway.
Well, did you know Ian Gillan later recorded a song called "The Abbey of Thelema," which was supposedly about Crowley's abbey, which he formed later in his life in Kefaloon? Did you know that? There's a Gillan song called "The Abbey of Thelema."
Didn't know that. Didn't surprise me, but I didn't know that. I know that Ian Gillan's meant to be a bit eccentric. Or is that an understatement?
No, it's an understatement. He lived in a big estate somewhere in Hertfordshire or Bedfordshire, and he was known locally as being, a bit off his nut and a bit bonkers. And he did some pretty wild rock and rolly things with Deep Purple, and came home in the clothes of the lady he'd spent the night with before, and that sort of.
Yeah, the Walk of Shame. The Walk of Shame.
The Walk of Shame, yeah. He invented a motorised spade or shovel and patented it, and thought he was going to make some money out of that. But Ian Gillan's another of those people who were in that stage of the music industry, who were clearly eccentric, flamboyant, musically talented, and actually intelligent.
Yeah.
There are members of it's no secret that one of the current members of Iron Maiden who joined the band, the singer, his name's Bruce Dickinson.
I was going to say, yeah.
Well, Bruce joined the band, and their first record that he made with them was called The Number of the Beast, which, of course, was Crowley's number, 666. Crowley described himself as the Beast, 666. But and Bruce Dickinson has a very strong interest in the occult, and is a very clever and intelligent man.
He
was behind making a movie about Crowley a few
years
ago.
I was going to you're stealing my thunder, dude, because I was going to bring that up.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
You see, I've met the Iron Maiden guys on more than one occasion, and I've had some quite interesting conversations with Steve Harris about history, because he was one of the he's the main songwriter, obviously, for Maiden, and I had some interesting when I was younger. Interesting conversations with him. I never got to talk to Bruce Dickinson, though. Unfortunately, he would never talk to him.
Bruce's ex-wife used to do the hair of the singer in the band I looked after, called Magnum. She used to be our hairdressing and wardrobe lady. And
You're really name dropping now. I think anyone in the rock that has heard of Magnum.
Do you think they have?
I have.
I was talking to somebody yesterday who's never heard of Magnum. Yeah, no,
really?
I tour managed Magnum for a while. They were my favourite band as a child. I mean, I've had a bit of an eccentric life, and I used to have this surreal moment on a tour bus sat next to them, thinking, I used to come and watch this band when I was a teenager, and they were my heroes, and here I am on a bus with them. Sat on an early morning, one drunken early morning, on watching the sun come up on Redcar Beach while we tried to write a song and things like that. Yeah.
Well, if you were talking about sort of funny rock star stories, my funniest one is probably to do with Nico McBrain from Iron Maiden. Anyone who knows Nico, he's a bit of a live wire. He's actually a really nice guy, but he is a bit of a live wire. And he used to, when Maiden weren't playing for a while, he was drumming for a guy called Phil Hilborn. And I was working behind the bar at the pub that they were playing at, and Nico was drunk. And he kept propositioning me for sex. And I was like, I'm not interested. My boyfriend's standing right there. And he's like, but I'm Nico McBrain, I'm from Iron Maiden. And I was like, really not interested. Boyfriend's standing right there, and even if he wasn't, you're not my type. We get a lot of rock stars in here. It's not going to work. Anyway, they came back about 3 or 4 months later, and they'd told Nico what he'd done to this poor barmaid. So he went and found out who I was, so he could come and apologise. And we actually sat there until 3 o'clock in the morning talking about the merits of books like Wuthering Heights and classic literature. It was a surreal conversation to be having with the drummer of Iron Maiden.
You see, that will surprise a lot of listeners, won't it? But it doesn't surprise me, because I think, by and large, most of the people I've met in the music industry, or certainly amongst the musicians, they do strike me as intelligent people, and genuinely, most of them are very nice guys and nice people.
I'd say the more famous they are, the nicer they are.
Well, the
ones I'd meet that had just had their first hit single or second hit single, and they're coming in with 2 or 3 girls draped on each arm, and they're like, "Don't you know who I am?" And you're thinking, "I think I know which band you're with. You're playing the one that's a 500-seater pub, right?" And then you get like the guys from Maiden coming in, who will sit and have an ongoing conversation with you about, what was it I was arguing? I argued with Yannick Gears about
who also played with Ian Gillan.
Yep, Gibson Les Pauls versus Fender Strats, because he's a Strat man.
He's a Strat man.
And I was a Les Paul girl, and we argued about the merits of the 2 guitars. And he turned around to me and he said, "I'm going to the loo, don't go anywhere." And I thought, yeah, right, he just wants to get rid of me. So I wandered off. The next thing I know, tap on the shoulder, "I told you not to leave, I was talking to you." So, so no, they are. Most of them, the more, established they are, the less egos they have with them, because they don't need to have them.
True. If you're, I mean, especially if you take a band like Led Zeppelin, who were, excessively popular beyond, they really were. They didn't quite rival the Beatles, but it was on that in that direction.
Yeah.
You know, you've no need to have an ego if you don't want one. My contact with Zeppelin is a little bit through Jimmy Page, because he made a record with a friend of mine whose name is Roy Harper, who's a musician and a folk singer, and I went to see Roy at a place called the Half Moon in Putney.
Oh yes, very well known place. Yeah.
And Robert Plant had come to the gig, and he was stood at the back of the room in his white I think they were light-coloured cowboy boots, and he got a suede jacket with tassels on and the big shock of blonde hair. And you know, Robert's quite a tall guy, and I said, "Oh, it's nice to see you here." And he just looked at me and went, "Shh, I'm in disguise."
And
Roy Harper, of course, recorded several. Jimmy used to play with Roy he's recorded on several albums, some of which he's not credited on because of contractual obligations and various other things. So I've had conversations with Roy Harper about the occult, but Roy's more pagan, I think, than an occultist. He's more interested in something perhaps a little more gentle, nature loving spirituality and bits of Britain that are like that, and he's a thoughtful guy. But he's another one. There's another example of someone who's extremely thoughtful and talented, but was friends with Led Zeppelin. And in a weird twist of fate, my colleague John Payne, who I was mentioning earlier, Doreen Valiente's last high priest.
Yeah.
John was very good friends with John Bonham, because they came from the same part of Dudley in the West Midlands.
Who, if anyone doesn't know, was the drummer in Led Zeppelin, who died in 1980. Choked on his own vomit in his bed, I believe.
Yeah, it was desperately sad.
Like that. Yeah.
But there was a whole scene. I mean, Black Sabbath came from Birmingham, Judas Priest. There was a whole sort of scene that grew out of the Birmingham things, and they all. Yeah. And my experiences with Magnum. I'm from Nottingham, but my experience of spending time with Magnum is that everybody who's in the music biz in Birmingham knows each other. And there's various pubs you can. If you ever wanted to go and find rocks, I mean, I don't think all the kids knew at the time, because we were all 14 and kind of starstruck, but there are certain pubs in Birmingham where you can go and you'd be bumping into rock stars all the time. Anyway, listen, I'm not that I'm taking over your show, but we seem to be turning the show into who's got the best rock and roll story.
I think you have, because you worked it. Mine was just from working and sort of frequenting a pub that was co-owned by a couple of the guys from Iron Maiden back in the 90s.
I think you're hiding your light under a bushel, because I've heard that you're quite a talented singer. Not so great with guitar though, but
cheeky. Yes, Ashley's being facetious, because I have been known to warble the odd rock song in my time. Yes, I'm going to blow my own trumpet now. On holiday, I did karaoke. I did Money, Money, Money by ABBA. I got a standing ovation from the people watching. There you go.
I heard you deserved it.
Well, I don't know about that. I think it was everyone else was that bad, that the fact I could actually hold a tune, sort of thing. But I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. I'm a rocker. What can I say? I
have one little rock and roll story for you. I was talking to a guy who was in a band, and they were in a covers band. And they performed in some dreadful hellhole somewhere in Crewe or Stoke or somewhere that didn't really. And they had three girls at the front. They were the only members of the audience who paid them any attention. And these three girls came standing at the front, dancing in front of them and making a big fuss. And the singer said to me, he said, eventually one of the girls beckoned him over, and he sort of, between songs, he came over, and she said, "Can you hurry up?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, we've got our name on the list for karaoke and we're on next." They hadn't realised it was an actual band. They thought it was karaoke.
Yeah, I've seen that happen.
Kind of deflates the ego somewhat, doesn't it?
It does. Yes. Yeah, I'll tell you off air about my wedding reception. Something similar happened there. But anyway, so back to Jimmy Page. Now, Jimmy Page, very well-known guitarist of Led Zeppelin, pioneering rock guitarist, did things with the guitar that nobody else had done at that time. You know, you link him in with all your Ritchie Blackmores, your Jimi Hendrix, all those amazing guitarists that came out of that sort of period, if you like. But Jimmy was very, and is I presume, yes, don't think it's something you stopped doing, was an occult enthusiast. Now, one of the things I've just read this very, very good book called The Curse of Led Zeppelin by a guy called Lance Gilbert, And it was very interesting. It was very good, and I recommend it to anyone who's got an interest in this. But one of the things he sort of said over and over again is that Jimmy Page would never admit to practicing the occult. He'd only ever admit to being an enthusiast in it, which his argument is you can't really be an enthusiast and have some of the stuff that he had in his possession and not actually be practicing it, which I can kind of see his point. And then he does start to talk about the curse of Led Zeppelin, and when you look at Led Zeppelin's history, you can see why someone might think that the band was kind of cursed, in a way. But Jimmy bought Boleskine in 1970. As a Crowley enthusiast, it probably was a bit like sort of, I don't know, the Holy Grail, I suppose. Would you say?
I don't know. I mean, the Crowley's Abbey in Cefalù near Palermo in Italy may be the place that one would associate most with the spirit of Crowley. But yes, certainly, if you're interested in the occult and you're interested in Crowley, then buying Boleskine House would be that would be pretty cool. And it would be the sort of, I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I can see why someone would want to buy that. You mentioned the one over in Italy, the Abbey of Thelema, and I mean that's got an interesting link to this whole curse and some of the bad stuff that happened to Led Zeppelin over their career. But so Jimmy bought Boleskine in 1970. He actually held it for 22 years, although he didn't spend very much time there, but he did film. It made me think of it when you were mentioning about Crowley being a mountaineer. He did actually film, I think it was The Song Remains the Same. He goes up a hill to see like a hermit, the wise hermit, and at the top of the hill when the hermit takes his cloak off, it's actually Jimmy Page, and he did actually film that in the outskirts on the land of Boleskine. So it has got sort of connections to a lot of the Led Zeppelin stuff. Now, he was very interested, according to this book, in the fire link, the fact that the house had been built on top of what they believed to have been was a burnt down church from the 10th or 11th century. But what it was also is that he, being a Crowley enthusiast, he was where Crowley had practiced some of his magic. Now, as a sort of a scholar in these kind of things, Ashley, why would...
I wouldn't go that far. A keen enthusiast.
All right, keen enthusiast. Yeah, potato. Yeah, anyway, someone who knows more than me. Okay, that's true. You know more than me. Why would Crowley have wanted to summon these demons in the first place?
To do his will, to do his bidding. I think Crowley was struggling for direction at that point in his life. I think he was not a leading light in the Golden Dawn yet, but he was trying to make himself such. He wanted to be a great magician, and he was on that path of high magic, which is really discovery of the self. Interestingly, and kind of interesting when you said that about Jimmy Page, and I've forgotten about The Song Remains the Same. That self-discovery really is presumably what that scene in the movie is alluding to. Yeah. That revealing that the great God is in fact yourself.
Yeah.
So I think Crowley was struggling a bit for direction, but he was also starting to develop further his personality, to revel in the bizarre and the wild and the almost the opposite of things. Later in his life, after discovering the conversation of his holy guardian angel, which he did in Cairo, he dedicated his life to his own religion of Thelema. Mm-hmm. And founded his abbey, and it was about discovering one's own true nature. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, is the Crowley saying.
Yeah.
And the point of wilt and do your will, it isn't do what you like or what you fancy. It's discover what is your most true nature and pursue that. And Crowley's point about Thelema is that if everybody in the world, everybody in the universe tends to order rather than chaos, or harmony rather than disharmony. And his point was that if everybody pursued their own true will, there'd be no conflict, because all true wills would work. So that motto is later adapted into the craft, into witchcraft, when we say, "And it harm none, do what you will." And it doesn't mean do what you like as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't really mean that. It means discover your own truest nature, unveil the self to the self. The magician is the person who has that awareness of himself beyond his own ego and beyond his own humanity, I suppose, to see his own true nature.
Right.
So all these people are alluding to that. And I think that's where Crowley got to eventually, which is why he founded his abbey to sort of teach other people. But at that stage in his life, when he's at Boleskine, he's pretty much experimenting with magic, and he will do more or less anything to break the rules and to push the boundaries. And I think that's I mean, we're getting a bit philosophical, but I think that's true in life, that all walks of life need somebody who pushes the boundaries and breaks the rules in order to move things forward.
Yeah. And
it's true in science, it's true in economics, politics, sociality, certainly in music. And of course, Led Zeppelin really represented that in music, didn't they? They were doing something different that was weird and odd and bizarre, and it caught a current. And I think that's certainly how Wicca and witchcraft spread, especially across America. Doreen Valiente herself said that the 1960s particularly was a time of liberation, of feminism and of sexual liberation, people experimenting with drugs, with religion, with spirituality and music and all sorts of other things. And it's a really fertile ground on which to sow the seeds of boundary breaking. So, yeah, long-windedly, then my answer is yes, I think Crowley was testing the boundaries by breaking them, which is presumably why he chose to summon the malevolent demons without the ability to control them when he was at Boleskine.
Right. Okay. So, Page wanted to immerse himself, it seems, in all things Crowley. That seems to be the way of looking at it. He had the interest in the occult. If you look at any of the Led Zeppelin albums, you will see the sigils. I can never put sigils on them. Anyone who knows anything about Page's stage costumes and everything will know that he had the word Zoso on a lot of his, and that was his particular emblem. Although nobody really knows what it means. Although there is a demon whose name was it Zozo? Is the demonic name, something along those lines, but apparently he said it wasn't to do with that demon and it had its own personal meaning and he wouldn't tell anyone what it meant. But one of the things that Page did do is he set up his own publishing firm, and he only ever published 2 books, and one of those books was the Lesser Key of Solomon, or also known as Gerthia, which apparently was one of the sort of like sub-books you were saying that Crowley used.
Well, yeah, actually, I said earlier that the book that Crowley was pursuing at Boleskine, The Sacred Magic of Abramelin, was translated from its original text by Mathers. Mathers also translated The Lesser Key of Solomon and a number of other medieval or earlier occult works. And certainly the Golden Dawn were practicing using those sort of texts. There's just before Crowley bought Boleskine, he was living in a flat in Chancery Lane in London with a guy called Alan Bennett. And Bennett is one of the leading lights in the Golden Dawn. Crowley was a newly made adept. He was one of the newbies. And the story goes that Bennett approached Crowley before or after one particular Golden Dawn ritual and accused him of working with the Gerthia, with the dark side, if you like, the left-hand path with the demons. And he says, "Little brother, have you been messing with the Gerthia?" Crowley denies it, and Bennett gives him a kind of wary-looking eye and says, "Well, then in that case, little brother, the Gerthia has definitely been messing with you." So yes, the Gerthia is a book that is, and the Key of Solomon are some of the foundational works that are part of the Victorian occult revival and henceforward into post-Crowley occultism and even Wicca and witchcraft. Gerald Gardner drew heavily on the Key of Solomon. In fact, I've seen a document that Gardner wrote where he wrote out the Key of Solomon, both lesser and greater, did all the drawings and made a copy of it in his own handwriting.
Right.
So he was certainly influenced by that and interested in it. Crowley would have been well versed in such works.
Yeah. So I find it interesting that the only 2 books that Page actually published through his publishing company, one of them was, excuse me, this occult work, if you like, so that he could make it more accessible to people. That's quite interesting.
I mean, it's a text that you'd have to understand. You'd have to be a student of the occult to have any understanding of it. But you wouldn't find very many serious occultist libraries that didn't have a copy of that in them.
Yeah. So he was by putting it back in print, he was making it available for occultists who wanted it to get a copy if they didn't already have one.
Yes.
Or at least showing his enthusiasm for it. The other thing as well, when you look at someone like Jimmy Page, is, I mean, we were joking about the whole sex, drugs and rock and roll thing earlier. Now, Crowley had the sex and the drugs bit. I mean, he was a heroin addict by the time he died, wasn't he? Or
he took all sorts of drugs throughout his life. I mean, it's some part of the thing of raising energy as well as sexually is to enhance that with various narcotics.
Yeah. So
drugs of all. Yeah.
And let's look at Led Zeppelin. Let's look at Jimmy Page. What's one? If you put the guitar thing to what side? What are the things you think of? You think of sex, you think of drugs, and you think of music. 3 possibly of the most powerful things when it comes to doing ritualistic work. Music, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is meant to be able to sort of change all the different wavelengths and maybe make those more sort of different beings, give them the chance to come through by opening up, not portals, that's the wrong word, but the music. And the other thing that music does is when you've got 20,000 people all pulling together because they've all wanted to come and see that band, the level of energy that they must create. I mean, I've seen mass hysteria. You'll have seen it being on tour where you've seen the whole mass hysteria. Really? When you get people who 5 seconds before the band comes on are the most normal people you've ever met. As that opening music starts playing or the dry ice starts going, they just dissolve into... I mean, I've done it at a gig and I couldn't believe I was doing it. I was in floods of tears when my favourite band was just about to come on. And I'm not normally like that. But
no, I know it happens. And I mean, I know being on tour with a band playing the same songs every night, not that Magnum were ever anything other than a great live band, and they always are and always have been. But some nights things were different. For some reason, something that none of us could define. And it was strange because it would be in the most strange and bizarre of venues that you wouldn't expect such a thing. But I think, now where was it? Bolton Town Hall. I don't know what happened in Bolton Town Hall. I don't know whether the people of Bolton were just up for it that night. But we had it's so memorable. We played hundreds of gigs, but something happened that was exactly that. And the band switched on and they played the songs differently and the music came out. You know, there were just nuances. The guitarist was not on autopilot. It was, there was something else going on. He came off and we were like, where did that come from? Yeah. And it's that upper thing. Now I've seen that in magic as well. I've seen that, the ritual work in the craft can go that way. Sometimes, for some reason, there is something that puts everybody in sync with each other.
Everything's
and the
aligned,
spirit world.
and it's. But when you look at sort of someone like Jimmy Page, he had access to that whenever he wanted it. He had access to the drugs. He had access to the sex.
Oh,
and
there's
he had
famous
access
stories
to the
of Led
music.
Zeppelin's. There's famous stories of Zeppelin's manager, Peter being demanding that they got paid not in dollars but in drugs and things like that.
Yeah, and there's also some quite scary, groupie sex stories as well. I think a fish was involved in one of them. But so they had access to all those key components. Now, as we were saying, a lot of these sort of rock stars, they might have given off the image that they were thick as 2 short planks, but to be quite honest, most of them weren't. You know, most of them had quite a lot going on upstairs. They just, didn't want to let people know too much that they did. But Jimmy Page, being a talented musician that he was asked to do a lot of sort of session work and write stuff for people. And one of the people he was writing for was the music for a film. I think it was called Lucifer Rising by Kenneth Anger.
Yes.
And Kenneth Anger is also he's still alive. He's in his 90s, an occultist. And supposedly, I've read a couple of accounts of this, but supposedly Anger was living in Page's house in London, which had its own recording studio and editing suite, because he'd edited The Song Remains the Same there. And whether it was Page's then girlfriend, whether it was the housekeeper, started to get a bit fed up with Kenneth Anger taking the mickey and demanding food and demanding this and demanding that they kicked him out. And it was on the back of that Kenneth Anger supposedly put a curse on Jimmy Page. And supposedly the curse he put on him was the Midas curse. Now, I mean, I don't know much about curses, but I know that Midas was meant to, everything he touched turned to gold, which he actually realised wasn't a great thing to happen.
Yeah. Yes.
Whether he did actually put a curse on them or not, it was following that some stuff started to happen to Led Zeppelin that wasn't too great. You mentioned the Abbey of Thelema. Well, Page did go and look at it. He was contemplating purchasing it because that really would be the sort of the stone in the crown, the jewel in the crown for a Crowleyite.
Yeah, yes, it would.
But as a band, they were all over in Europe, and I believe that they were in Rhodes, near Greece. And Page had decided to go across to Italy to go and look at the abbey. And he'd left his daughter, whose name is Scarlet Lilith. And I told you both then. Yeah, exactly. I knew you'd cotton on to that one.
Well, no, I've cottoned on to the Scarlet, but I've also cottoned on to Lilith, because when he was at Boleskine, Crowley got married to a woman, and he had his daughter, who was called, oh, goodness me, lots of long names, Sappho, Jezebel, something Lilith.
Yeah.
Yeah. She died quite young in life, very sadly, and Crowley's friend, and Crowley records in his diaries that his friend said she died of acute nomenclature. But Lilith was definitely, and Lily was the kind of pet name they gave to this child.
Yeah. So his daughter was called Scarlet Lilith. Now, she was in a car with Robert Plant's then partner, and I think his 2 children. That car went off a cliff, and the Plant family were all seriously injured. The only person who walked away without a scratch from the 5 was Scarlet.
Wow.
Now, Jimmy was supposed to have been in the car with them, but he'd decided not to, and he'd decided to go to Thelema. Now, whether because of occult stuff that Jimmy had done, Scarlet was almost sort of protected as well, I don't know. Whether the fact that her name, which has an awful lot of occult reference, as you just pointed out, and when we talked about the Scarlet Women earlier and everything else, whether...
Well, yeah, let's just explain that obviously Scarlet Women is a generic term for ladies of loose moral character, but Crowley's sacred magic that he did, his sex magic, involved having, when it was a female partner as opposed to a male partner, for Crowley, she was the Scarlet Woman. She's the whore of Babylon, and the Scarlet Woman is a role, if you like, in Crowley's magical system that's throughout his life was fulfilled by different women. But yeah, Scarlet is a very, very important name and title and colour in the Crowley system. Yeah.
Yeah. So whether it was to do with that she didn't, but the probability of 4 people being seriously hurt and the one person not in quite a severe car crash was quite
1 in 5, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah.
That's if you want to get mathematical about the probability, but yes.
Yeah, 1 in 5. But there was not a scratch on her. You also then had, so you had the crash in Rhodes. You had, whilst I believe they were on tour, Robert Plant's son became ill and then died literally 24 hours later. You had, we mentioned about Bonzo, about John Bonham, him dying in his sleep in 1980. You had sort of their albums start to not be as successful, them starting to sort of a lot more bickering, infighting. Well, they refused to tour after John passed away anyway. So there was all this bad luck that started to flow around them, and whether it was Anger's curse, whether it was just the band, their exploits caught up with them. Who knows? But it's an interest when you look at some of the parallels. When you look at the energy that Page had access to and had easy access to, would he really have not been doing rituals of some sort?
I don't know. I don't know whether he'd have had time on tour, and I don't really know enough about Jimmy Page, the person, to be able to comment on what his magical interests or abilities are. But you certainly paint a plausible case. I mean, the universe operates on cause and effect, but I mean, this is a magical teaching. It's maybe strange to get your head around the concept, but one doesn't necessarily follow the other. Once you can escape the bounds of time, then cause and effect. Sometimes part of an occultist or a witch's duty is to realise that having seen the effect, you now need to do the cause, and that's part of doing your true will. Sometimes you find that you have a responsibility to do something. And I don't mean necessarily magical, just in your life, because something else has happened. I mean, I know that people will say the laws of karma, and they'll say about paying it forward, and that one good turn deserves another, and it's important to do that. And I don't really want to get into discussing the Wiccan concept of the law of threefold return, that what you give out comes back on you threefold. It's not a law, it's not a rule. But certainly the universe appears to have interrelation. There's an interconnectedness between events and actions and intent that people display in their activities. So, I think it's highly likely that if somebody was interested in the occult to the extent that they would actually buy Crowley's house, that they might well be actively engaging in the occult. But I wouldn't comment on whether he was or wasn't.
Nobody knows for definite.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting actually is that the narrative of a rock star's life is similar to that of an occultist, or it could be if both got what they wanted and were successful at it. I mean, I've read a book that's very interesting about Crowley that sort of paints him as the world's first rock star. That his behaviour patterns and the way he ran his life is then repeated by very famous rock stars all over. And I mean, that not that Crowley sort of ever strode out confidently in his leather trousers in front of 20,000 screaming groupies, potential groupies, but
he would have done if he got the chance.
Oh boy, would he! Oh boy, would he! But I mean, But yes, you knowing the back end of the music industry, no pun intended. That you walk. It's a ritual. It's a ritualistic act. A band going on stage. There's this whole mythos created around it. And I mean, I loved it. I was so lucky to do these things and hang out with these bands, to go on a tour bus and there's a sort of the gig has got a ritual. You arrive at the gig and you get off the bus and there's somebody waiting at the stage door and you talk to them and they come back tonight, and the whole setting up the lighting rig, and then you go off to the hotel and then you go and cause mayhem somewhere, and your poor old tour manager has to go running around the local hostelries gathering you up at 5 o'clock for sound check, and sound check itself is a myth. These things are so reminiscent of magical ritual, and religious ritual. That there's a parallel, and the whole intent is designed to whip up the energy, to bring up the energy, so that the concert takes the people indulging in it, not just the musicians on stage, but the audience too, on this kind of elevated level of consciousness, shall we say.
Well, you do definitely come down the next day. You do definitely go...
Well, not if you're on tour with Led Zeppelin with access to all of that. You can just keep going. But, you're right. Sorry, Penny. I was being supercilious there.
I know you were. But if you're sober, when the energy, you do almost feel sort of like, oh... It was almost like... I always used to feel, even when I was sort of driving and I wasn't drinking or doing... after a gig, I'd almost be like, what just happened? It was that kind of... Almost like you were drunk for that hour and a half. You were on a high. And to me, that's a good gig. And that is, well, similar to a ritual. But all that foreshadowing we've been doing throughout the show, I'll let you say it. What lake is Boleskine on the banks of?
I've no idea. I don't know.
Give over.
Well, okay. Boleskine House sits on the shores of Loch Ness.
Loch Ness, Nessie, another mythical being, who has there's been sort of reports of her in the Boleskine notes, if you like, back thousands of years. So. Is it the energies that have gone on at Boleskine? But interesting enough, she started being sighted about 10 years after Crowley left.
Yes, I mean, Crowley wasn't aware of the Nessie legends. No, there's no...
So is it his magic that possibly opened up a crack in whatever?
Oh, were you being clever there? Were you being witty there? Opened up a kraken. The great beast dwelling under the water. But
very good. No, that's just the accent. No,
did you say that by accident? Really?
Yes, I did just say that by accident. Opened up a crevice or a crack in time that allowed this being from another time and another dimension to come through every so often.
What if it was one of the very demons that Crowley summoned up?
There you go. But how's that for spooky? And I bet there's an awful lot of people, and even if they'd heard of Boleskine, they may not realise it's on the banks of the beautiful Loch Ness. But this brings our story full circle, really, because in about a few years ago, tragedy struck Boleskine House. And it burnt down. And there's only really a husk left of it now. Which, when you think about what happened there in the 10th century to that church, and from what you and I were talking about, fire being a cleansing agent, and was it regeneration and all that kind of stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got probably about 4 or 5 minutes left of the show, have we? Is that right?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, we probably can't quite get into the magical use of the elements and the 4 elements of the ancient world: earth, air, fire, and water. But yes, I mean, you could see fire as purifying and cleansing, and certainly the burning of witches, which didn't take place in Britain; they were hanged.
No.
But in Europe, that was the idea: was that purification through the flames. And you've got mythical beasts like the phoenix, which one might say resembles in its physical characteristics something dragon-like, something potentially Loch Nessy. I mean, maybe we're getting a bit esoteric here, but yeah, the notion that of a phoenix is a creature that goes through the flames, transforms, and comes out the other side. There's a lot more to the mythology of phoenixes.
Oh, yes. But I just like the fact that, you know, Boleskine's history started with fire, and unless someone wants to buy the land and restore the building, which, from the reports I've read, nobody does at the moment, it's ended with fire. And the fire brigade never found what caused it. So, on that note, thank you ever so much for being my guest, Ashley. That's been... we could have talked for a lot longer. I think we could have gone off on quite a few tangents, not least our backstage band stories, if nothing else. That's another time.
Most of mine can't be broadcast, I have to say.
Yeah, that's another time off air, I think.
I think so.
So what have you got? You've just come back from a pagan camp, which, from what you were saying, went very, very well.
Yeah, we had quite a lot of people. It's been nice weather and sunny, and we've all been very mellow and relaxed. And we've turned the wheel of the year again, and we did our ritual around the fire. And yes, I was telling you about that. Yeah. So I'll be at other pagan camps. There's I can't. It's not really a plug because the Artemis gathering, which takes place in Oxfordshire in August, is now sold out. So you wouldn't get to now. But yeah, I've got a few talks I'm doing. Pagan Con in Lancashire, in the or near Preston, I think, in a bit. I'm doing various talks. I've got some friends in the paranormal community, so I pop up from time to time to give a talk about the history of Wicca and witchcraft and magic and the occult and display some artifacts. So there's always something going on, and life continues to be interesting. And I think if you align your true will, as Crowley would have it, to that, then you start to discover your own nature, and you start to discover what makes you happy and pursue that. Then you can have bizarre and extraordinary lives full of coincidence and full of excitement. And someone's got to be a rock star.
Exactly.
Somebody's job is a rock star. So everybody who dreams of these things. I was that kid who stood looking up at my heroes on the stage. Little did I know that 30 years later I'd be managing them. It's bonkers, isn't it?
It is. Well, I want to say thank you ever so much for Ashley for taking the time out to do this show with us tonight. I have actually learned quite a lot, and anyone who knows my sort of insatiable appetite for knowledge will know that that's a good thing for me. But thank you ever so much for listening to this show on Boleskine House in Scotland. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, Parasearch Radio has shows on 6 nights of the week. They're all available for download, and you can go and subscribe to our new YouTube channel and listen to them on there and see all the other content we've got going on that channel. Well, all that leaves me to say is have a good evening. Have a good evening. Do what that will. I've just had shouted in my ear, but that's just spoiling my outro. But good evening. Sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.